welcome to the Time Board podcast. And today we have AT, who is also from Monk Prayogshala. Actually, can you give me a short introduction?
Sure. So I'm Anirudh, and basically I work at Monk Prayogshala as a research author at the Department of Economics, and I lead. What that means is that I basically lead research projects in economics at Monk Prayogshala, and I usually sort of also lead some of our training, like capacity building efforts related to research and behavioral economics, which is my area of interest and work. And outside of Prayogshala, like I do some consulting work, which is primarily in the domain of like applied microeconomics and development economics. So I have previously consulted with the Internet Society, with the World Resources Institute, Institute of Rural Management, Anand, and the CII Co, which is at IIM Ahmedabad, and a few other places. And last thing, I guess I teach. So I do some teaching. And I've been teaching for about 5 years now, and primarily teach undergrads economics, and I have like some courses in economics. I think that kind of everything.
That's a lot, but for sure, I think you've covered most of it. So, let's start with your origin story, so to speak.
It's actually pretty complicated because usually when somebody asks me where I'm from, it's very hard to tell them. So I just say Bombay because that's easy. Because I spent most of my life here. But my family is technically Maharashtrian. So from both my mom and my dad's side. But they are part of a sort of group of Maharashtrians who migrated to Tanjavur in Tamil Nadu like a really long time ago, centuries ago. In absolute terms, I would say that my family is like Tanjavur Maharashtrian, but my dad and his dad were all raised in Bangalore, so I speak Kannada because I spent a lot of my childhood, growing up with my grandmom, with my dad's mom around, and she used to speak to us in Kannada, and that was great because we learned Kannada. And my mom's side is mainly they grew up in Madras, now Chennai. And basically, they speak a Tamil, but I never really spoke Tamil at home, so I never really learned it. It turns out because my dad had a transferable job, he was a central government employee. He basically used to get transferred every once in a while. So we ended up spending actually most of our time in Mumbai. So most of my schooling, most of my undergrad, all of my undergrad was actually in Mumbai. So in a way, like I identify a little bit more as being from Mumbai, but also being from Bangalore because of my dad's sort of connection, and I speak Kannada and things like that. So that, I guess, captures a little bit of where I'm from or what my family background is. I guess, so I did I did a big part of my schooling for about 6 years in Aurangabad, which is a small town in Maharashtra. Well, now it's a city, it's not a town anymore. And then after that, we moved to Bombay, and we were there for a lot longer. And for a couple of years, I was in Hyderabad, which was my 9th and 10th standard, and that was pretty formative for me because I guess a lot of people from school around 8th standard, like when you're 13, that's when puberty hits, or maybe a little bit before. But when puberty hits, you like priorities change suddenly. So like all of the friends that I thought I would have when I came back to Mumbai after 2 years, like they just disappeared.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it was quite. So for those 2 years I was in Hyderabad, like we actually managed to make friends because Hyderabad is a great city, and that school that we were in was really amazing. People are like really, really nice. And then we came back to Mumbai, and then I did my junior college, which is like 11th and 12th in NM College. I did commerce, and after that I did my undergrad and BA in economics and statistics at Ruya College. And that was like a very wholesome, fun experience because it was very different crowd than what I had seen at NM. And it was 3 years, and like we all sort of grew up together and stuff, so it was a lot of fun. After that, I went abroad to do my master's.
We'll like go through that like step by step.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Okay, sorry. So let me just say one more thing on the background aspect, which is that I think I was incredibly fortunate to be growing up maybe in a family and in a household where both my parents worked. because so my mom is a CA, she's a chartered accountant, and she kind of does a lot of work in. She was working at the time in IT because they had a lot of accounting requirements, and she used to work at the intersection of software and accounting. And yeah, I think it was pretty awesome because she traveled the world, which I never, which was amazing for me as a role model, but also I think just to just in terms of exposure to many different things in the world. So yeah, I think a big part of maybe what my upbringing was to that part. The fact that my mom was not just working, but she was also traveling, and yeah, we missed her like hell, and it was still nice. And it was nice when she got us back all these chocolates and video games and things.
Yes. So what was your first exposure to economics as like a discipline or study?
So it, for better or for worse, I guess it was in 11th standard. So we had this economics teacher. Her name was Professor Suman Rao, and I still remember her because she reminded me actually a lot of my grandmom. So because she was a little bit older, but she was phenomenal. Like because she had a very sort of how to say, gentle approach to economics in the sense that she didn't sort of shove anything down people's throats and didn't say that no, you have to approach it in exactly this way and things. And I think that's what appealed a little bit to me, at least from the economics point of view. I think that my decision to take commerce in 11th and 12th was in no way guided by the fact that I wanted to do economics.
Yeah.
I think it just maybe stemmed from the fact that maybe I wanted to do something in like management or business or something like this, with no clear sort of intention to do economics. But I think she played a pretty important role because that was my first exposure, like formal exposure to economics. And I think in the following year, there was another professor whose name, unfortunately, I'm totally spacing on right now. But he was part of, so because at that time you had to take tuitions, like if you wanted to do well in 12th and things. So we ended up going to a tuition class. The tuition class was Bhatiyas. And a lot of people in NM will know about Bhatiyas. But basically, the professor there, he was also like, despite it being a tuition class where that the only objective is that you have to just learn something and be able to sort of memorize it and sort of spit it out when the time is right, he still made us emphasize on concepts and understanding, sort of asking questions and things like that. So I think that also sort of left me with this understanding that maybe economics is something that I would really like to explore a little bit more on. Yeah, I think much like anybody who gets into a subject, like I think having a good first introduction to it is like super important. And from my point of view, that was these two teachers, but also before that, it was my dad, because he has a PhD in agronomy and soil sciences, and he worked with this institution called the National Bank for Agricultural and Rural Development, NABARD, and yeah, I mean, despite him being an agriculture guy, like he was working with finance, he was working with budgets, he was working with projects and things. So I think maybe somewhere in the background, like that was all economics anyway. I mean, economics as I know it now. But yeah, I think he was definitely also there in sort of, I guess, encouraging me to think about these things.
I mean,
a little beyond what's in the books.
I mean, your first thesis was also on microfinance and specifically in rural campaigns, so that makes sense. Right. I want to ask, what kind of student were you? What was like your somewhat academic performance like? Were you good at maths? Specifically, I think people who go into economics are kind of concerned about that. So
yeah, no, I was terrible at maths. Like I mean, I think after I did it for 1 year, it didn't work out very well for me. I kind of sucked at the big sort of things that today even I use like. I was just teaching a class in like postgrad level microeconomics, and I was doing all the things that I absolutely sucked at when I was in 11th standard. So somehow it's amazing that I got here. But yeah, like I didn't do really well at math in my 11th grade, so I ended up dropping it for my 12th. Because in commerce you have this option of doing this thing called secretarial practice, and I loved that subject. I don't know why I did, but I just just loved it. And it was better than math for me. I guess that was one reason why I loved it. But then I took stats in my undergrad, and that was sort of a big motivator for me to continue doing economics, which was more technical and like the things that we know about modern day economics and things. But if I hadn't done that, then I don't think that I would really survive in economics, because it's a fairly quantitative discipline. It's very mathematically oriented. So yeah, I think in terms of being good at math, no, I don't think I'm still very good at math. Like I still look to other people to help me with a lot of things. But I'm good with the stats. And I think that, again, the fact that I had a good education in statistics at Ruya, that drove a lot of my formal understanding of things that economists like econometrics and, regression models and things like that. Because I wasn't looking at it from this point of view of that some theoretical model that I was trying to learn, but I understood the statistics that was kind of underlying it. But so maths, not so much, but stats, yes. And in 11th and 12th, I was not, I don't have any punches to pull. Like, I don't think it was very nice in the way that they teach math. And no, I'm not saying that I can do a better job in any way, but I definitely think it could be very different. Because I was totally good with math, like up until 10th standard. So I had no real reason to drop it after 11th, other than the fact that the 11th math really like screwed me up. So I don't think that I was intrinsically bad at math. I think it was probably the way in which I was being exposed to it that I didn't really like, or maybe it didn't really fit with how I learned. And yeah, I couldn't do anything about that. So the only thing I could do was to drop math. Yeah.
Do you think if you were taught stats a bit differently as well, as in maybe a little bit worse, maybe a bit closer to average, do you think you would have picked it up as well, or do you think you would have struggled with that?
No, not really. Like, I think, it would probably be the same story. It's just the only thing that I guess, like you said, that stats has going for it is that it's a little, like, you can sort of find correspondences with what you're learning in statistics with what you see in maybe around you, what you see in the papers, or what you maybe consume more generally. But with math, there's no sort of easy equivalent, right? So you can't sort of look at a flower and say that I really see the equations here. So it's a bit challenging. But I think that, that's a teacher's job, right? So, maybe we'll talk about that later when we come to teaching. But I think a teacher's job is to make it interesting. Yeah.
So we talked about how you got exposed to economics first, like formally. But then how did you... I think in an earlier podcast, you mentioned that you kind of fell down the research route. So I want to ask you a bit more detail about that.
I guess from when I started doing economics, like it wasn't apparent to me that that you would have to do research in economics. But I think as once I started my undergrad and I was talking to my dad and we were trying to figure out what future options look like, etc. I think it became clear that many economists go down the research route because they're sort of expected to do some sort of underlying work to identify, say, what's going on in the economy, or just understand how people are behaving, or something at this broad level, and make some predictions. So I think that the reason that I also thought at that point that it might be useful to do a PhD was because, again, I came from this position of privilege that I had somebody in my family who had already done a PhD, so kind of knew what a little bit at least. Nobody can fully explain exactly what it entails, but at least they can guide you in terms of maybe what you will come out with, or maybe what is expected in that. So for me, I think once I got into economics, like even in my FY, I think I was already veering towards the path of doing a PhD. That's because I knew that if I maybe wanted to be an economist or sort of do economics in the future, then I needed to have a PhD. I need to have training that is probably at the highest level, because everything seemed super interesting to me in terms of just understanding how people behave. That was not coming from, say, like understanding markets or about how economies work and things like that. But from my point of view, it was more about what is this lens that economics gives us to maybe understand how people behave. And I think micro was a pretty useful tool. Again, the way that we were taught it was maybe not at the same level as, say, how they teach it in various other countries, even various other cities within India. But I still think that it was a very good sort of exposure to, kind of cement that some sort of aspiration for me to continue doing economics. At least it kept me sort of hooked in that way. And it also helped that I think I had some very good sort of colleagues or like sort of friends who were doing the same course with me, who agreed that, okay, yeah, this textbook is nice, but it's not everything.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more that might be going on. And I think in a way, it sort of meant that I always wanted to do more than what was just in the book. I think you earlier asked about what kind of student was I. So yeah, I was that kind of student who just wanted to go a little bit beyond the book. But I think when it comes to exams, obviously, you can't. But at least as part of, what I was doing in my undergrad and to some extent, even in junior colleges, maybe trying to think beyond like what was just given to us. So, yeah.
Would you say a PhD, like having done a PhD now, it was as essential as you thought back then that it was?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I think that, and that's maybe not looking at it from this confirmatory bias sort of point of view, but I think from this point of view that if I wanted to do what I'm doing today, then I don't think there would be another way to do it. I think that it has to be done through this sort of line of, going through master's, a PhD, and then doing your own research. I think because that was something that I always thought about. I never knew maybe what it would look like to do research on my own. So I'm incredibly sort of grateful that I have this opportunity with MP and with other places that I do work with now. But the fact that I get to do my own research is in a way coming from what I was thinking about during my undergrad. And yeah, definitely, I think without a PhD, it would be very difficult to be where I am right now.
Okay, fair enough. Tell me a little bit about your bachelor's in Ruya in general. What was the experience like? And also your paper on the media campaign for rural development involved with microfinance.
Oh, yeah. So Ruya was great. So I ended up applying to, like, after my 12th, I ended up applying to various colleges as usual in Mumbai.
Yeah.
I was pretty sure that now I'm trying to remember, but I was pretty sure that I maybe was not going to go outside Mumbai. But I think we did end up sort of giving some competitive exams. Like I think I gave a law exam, which had just been introduced at the time, CLAT, common,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, it's been so long. And I think then we ended up applying. When I say we, sorry, I should say that I have a twin brother, so he's same age as I was. Just that he's doing something slightly different from me. So, but we ended up sort of choosing colleges in this way that was, I guess, overlapping. Not because we wanted to be together or something like that, just because we just helped each other out. So we ended up. So then I ended up sort of applying to many colleges. I think I even applied to Xavier's. I didn't get in. Xavier's was in fact the only college I didn't get into. So then I just went with Ruya because I think compared to say a few other colleges that I was considering at that time, like I think I had Jai Hind and a couple of others. Like I think maybe that was the one that I liked the stats department. I liked the fact that you could do stats there. And Ruya was one of, I think, only 2 colleges at that time that was offering stats as well as so doing this double major thing. And I knew that was important to me because somehow, I guess, I don't know how I had that much foresight, but I knew that I needed to do some technical subject with econ if I really wanted to sort of, go forward in terms of doing PhD and things. So it was good. And I think my first year at Ruya was like good, but the second year itself was really amazing. Like because I think that we got exposed to more subjects in economics and stats and, sort of building on things that happened in the first year. So in fact, just the other day, I was talking with one of my close friends who was in Ruya with me. And basically, we were remembering this course called Foundation course, which was called FC. And
Okay, yeah.
I honestly, much like secretarial practice, I honestly remember very little of what we learned in that course. I only remember that it used to be a 7:30 lecture and we had to be there because the teacher was super strict on attendance. And, I think the fact that first year was full of these kinds of oddities meant that, I don't think I was really sort of focusing too much on, learning what I was learning in the class. But the second year was like, in terms of learning, I think was pretty amazing, especially the statistics courses that I ended up taking. I think the Ruya department was pretty fantastic because they had they had some good teachers at the time. They had so one teacher especially, Devyani ma'am, like she was particularly sort of influential because she took I think that she struck me in the same way as my first economics teacher, Professor Suman, sort of struck me, which is that very simple sort of approach and trying to sort of illustrate and kind of bring life into these concepts. In BA in Mumbai University system at the time you had to take, I think it's still there, which is that you have to take 3 sort of subjects. So in many colleges they had already like made packages of these like 3 subjects like which you could take. So in an ideal world, I would have liked to take economics, psychology, and statistics.
Okay.
But we didn't have that. So if you took psychology, you would have to take either political science or philosophy with it. I think some degree you could take I don't remember, like philosophy, political science, and one more subject was there with psychology. But basically, this was like a package. So you either took that or you took no psychology. So with economics, they had economics, commerce, and statistics. And the reason I bring that up also is because in commerce there was this Professor Urmila Moon, and she was very enthusiastic about actually teaching commerce. And for somebody who had come from a commerce background, like I was not learning anything new, but she still made it super interesting. And I think that she was really the first person who I came across was doing research in at the college level. Before that, I had never really come across an academic. And she was doing her PhD also at the time. I think that she did. I think she's still at Ruya, and I think stay in touch with her on and off. But yeah, she was like also a big inspiration for me and also my friends who were sort of doing commerce at that time. Even though commerce as a subject itself, like we were like, sure, yeah, no biggie, like we've done this before. And then I think, and in the third year, obviously, things where they tell you to get serious and stuff. So things did get serious in the sense that, we maybe started sort of doing more, I guess, advanced topics in economics. It was called Advanced Economic Theory. But looking back, it was not really that advanced.
Okay.
But still, I think from the perspective of, I think what I know today, like it was still pretty advanced for the stuff that we'd covered earlier.
So what did you cover in advanced economic theory at the time?
At the time, like we were doing, we had two sections, which was one was micro and one was macro. And in the micro section, we were doing sort of we did, I think, a little bit of game theory and a little bit. So I think what ended up happening was that we did a little bit of lots of things, which were usually covered in advanced courses. But we didn't end up doing them in a lot of depth. So it's like if you understood from that sort of very basic coverage of it, then you understood. Otherwise, you would just be like, yeah, I just have to learn this. Like we'll like go into depth later, kind of thing. So in that way, I think it was pretty helpful. And we had one thing that was called Indian financial system, I think. And basically,
we had that as well.
Yeah. So that was also basically. So that had a research project component as well. So this is where I talk about that media campaign paper, because when we were doing commerce in our second year, basically Urmila ma'am, like she basically said that here is this conference. It's called the International Conference on Microfinance in India, ICOM-FI. I still remember it pretty vividly. And she said that there's a call for papers. Like if you're a student, then maybe you guys should consider writing a paper, etc. She never said that. So it's often it's pretty common sometimes where a professor will say, you write a paper and we'll submit it together, right? Which is basically a euphemism for I will take the credit. And or maybe from a more paternalistic standpoint, it could mean that I will be the senior, I will wear the big boy boots in this paper or whatever. But either way, she never said that. She never said that I will help you or that, I will sort of make sure this paper goes through nothing. She just said, here's the call for papers. Here are the topics. See if you guys want to do something. And me and my friend, we were like, hey, we know something about writing stuff. So let's just try putting together something. And we didn't start with where I start today for most research papers, which is with a research question. We just started with a topic, which was media campaign for rural development. And we had no idea what that meant at the time. So we just started looking and sort of reading papers, which is what now we do, which now we realize is a literature review. And when the first time I heard review of literature from Urmila ma'am herself, I was like, why would you read English books? Like, these are not relevant in this context.
Yeah.
And then I realized it just means general literature. So it was a pretty fun experience writing that paper. I remember it was maybe about 3,000, 4,000 words. That's about it. It was a descriptive paper, but basically outlined different things that government or sort of banking system, etc., can do to basically help promote microfinance and help promote sort of financial inclusion and development and things like that. And I think we ended up reading some papers, citing them and sort of doing all of that. And then we submitted the paper to the conference. And we were pretty surprised because it got accepted. Yeah, because it was really strange. And then we and it was at Pondicherry, it was the University of Pondicherry. And so my friend Rishikesh and I, we basically said that, yeah, Pondicherry looks pretty good. We could go there, even if we don't get anything else out of it, practically speaking. And basically we ended up staying at a lodge of some sort, like, which was really shady now that I think of it. But for two undergrad, like, and we were boys, right? So
Yes, yes.
we have a lot of privilege with that as well, that we didn't have to worry about, safety and things like that. And I think we barely ended up really sleeping there or anything. I think we were just using it as maybe a place where you could safely keep some things. And then the morning off, I guess, so we went via Bangalore and we took a bus from Mumbai. So a bus from Mumbai went to Bangalore, and then from Bangalore we ended up taking a taxi or something else from there, maybe another bus. And I sort of vividly still remember everything about that journey. And then we got to Pondicherry, and then we got into this room, and then next day there's a photo of me and Rishikesh with basically ties and like white shirts and trousers and things, and we go to University of Pondicherry. When we get there, it's actually exactly as I imagined it, which was, as a conference, there's so many people there and they're all talking about their ideas and they're all talking about their work. And we attended a few sessions and it was like super interesting to hear about. I didn't have any questions about their work, but certainly like it got me, thinking about various things. And my friends and I would compare notes and over lunch and things like that. And then finally, when it was our turn to present, like our session went on forever because like the speakers who were there in our session, I think it was maybe a 1 hour session, and basically about 3 speakers out of 5 already took up that 1 hour. So when it was finally our chance, like we just basically had no, we didn't have any time. So the only thing I remember about my presentation was just rushing through like everything. And we were like, that's okay. We came here just to really experience this. And yeah, I think that was a pretty useful. And I remember still collecting the certificate and then seeing our name in the book. And I think those are all special things because I think as a researcher, it gave us like as our first exposure to, like what it means to do research. I think it gave us an idea of maybe where it can take us. And I think when we came back, then our teacher was like, Urmila ma'am was also pretty happy, and we were really glad that she supported us. And then I kind of carried forward that momentum into this Indian financial system project where I worked on a research paper related to like, it was a critical review of impact studies in microfinance. And I remember that was because I ended up reading a lot of papers for it, because I was like, how that earlier paper could have been better is if we read more papers. Right. So then I started reading more papers. Yes. And some of it I understood, some of it I did not, to be completely honest. But since it was for a guy, I just ended up putting together whatever I could. I think overall, I think Ruya was pretty fantastic experience from, giving me at least these 1 or 2 opportunities, which now when I'm looking back, I think that these were pretty important in terms of, gauging my interest in research and just sort of going forward in that area.
You also really enjoy attending conferences, right? I see you going to like a lot of them.
Yes, I do go to a lot of them. I don't say that maybe I do enjoy them a little bit, but certainly I think in economics, like if you don't present, then you somehow lose out. Like that's unfortunately the culture in economics today. I think the last thing I'll say about Ruya is, of course, that our teachers were more than sort of open to providing letters of references and things like that. And at the time, you don't think how much of a difference it would make. I think you just think that I need to get this application through and I need to apply to this foreign university. So they just all need to submit letters. I don't really care how they do it, what they do, etc. And somehow that also seemed to make a difference. So I think I credit a lot of that to my time at Ruya.
You mentioned that you had done some kind of writing as well, like you and your friend, and that's why you decided to go for the research paper call in ultimately. So what kind of writing were you guys doing before?
So in undergrad, both he and I, we were part of, so he was also in NM college with me, Rishikesh. So basically we were part of this Rotary Club, and basically in Rotary Club, they had an editorial board. So that's the thing that you asked about earlier. And basically, we ended up doing some small writing, sort of creative writing kind of thing. And he was part of a sort of a club in NM, which was called, I think, the English Literary Association or something like that. But I mean, basically, we were both into quizzing and writing and all of these sort of what it now gets classified as literary arts. I think that was where our passion and sort of came from for writing. And I think the research was just a good way to check whether that passion translates to like other types of writing, not just stories and things like that. He still writes wonderfully. Like he maintains a lovely travel blog, which is called The Fourth Seat, if I can give a shout out. I don't know if anybody will be able to find it because I don't have a link or anything, but it's a lovely blog.
Yeah, I'd love to link it, in the description.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you basically, this is how you started reading research papers. Awesome. When did you start learning to code for stats?
So again, the thing that was different about Ruya was in our third year when we finally learned regression, which is now something that I use very mindlessly. But when we first learned regressions, I think we didn't learn it purely as theory. And that was amazing because so Sujata ma'am was the teacher in stats at the time, and she was an amazing teacher, very dynamic, and she refused to just do slides in class, and she refused. So at the time, the stats practical used to be, we used to have graph paper and we used to have to like draw stuff and sort of solve stuff manually by hand, like find median, mode, and sort of then find.
Yeah, we did that as well.
Yeah, exactly, right? Things that again don't make any sense to me now, but back then they were everything. That was everything. But she said that you all should also use Excel. And given that, so this is what, 2011, right? So given that we didn't all have laptops of our own and everything, she was sort of she, I think, allowed us to share sort of if somebody could bring some laptop and if we could share and etc. And honestly, I think that was like very, very useful for me just to understand what happens when you put in data, like what does data look like in a real world sort of setting. So I think that was maybe some introduction to first think outside of what the stats was at the BA level, which was, just do these numericals and get some marks and things. So that, and then when I went to Warwick, that was where I got the bigger exposure to Stata. So Stata is a software that's actually used mainly by economists, but economists, geographers, others. But it's a paid sort of software. But in Warwick, they taught us Stata for about like maybe there were 2 or 3 sessions on doing Stata, which is supremely helpful because they taught us enough just to get us doing our own research projects, doing our own assignments using Stata, etc. And I stayed in touch with it because after Warwick, when I came back to India from the UK, I didn't get a job in an academic setting. I got a job at a think tank, and they didn't really see the value of using a Stata to do some basic sort of analysis, etc. So instead, when I joined IRMA, which is the Institute of Rural Management, that's when I was working with another academic, an economist, who was doing research papers in rural development and applied econ and things like that. So that's where my Stata actually helped, because then I could sort of apply a lot of things that I learned in Warwick to actual data sets. And the data set in question was very, very messy. Like it was a large scale data set of 8,600 households or something like this, captured over 2 time periods. And they had about 240 villages, lots of different levels of aggregation. And the guy there, Hari Nagarajan, who I still work with, and he's my mentor in many ways. He just gave me this data. He said, "Here's the questionnaire. Here's the code book. Here's some data sets that we all have. Here are some other codes that somebody else had written." And he said, "Now do the analysis." Right? So he just said, "Go figure it out." And he threw me off the deep end, and I think that I didn't present it at all in any bit. It was very, very challenging because I had no idea if I was doing anything correctly, if I had sort of just done a few things wrong and still presented something, then he would never know that I had done something wrong. He was just like totally trusting me in this. And I think it helped that I had my colleague who was working with me at the time, Niranjana, like she came from Warwick as well. So we were friends and we sort of knew each other. So that helped me a great deal. And, we were sort of supporting each other on doing some of those tasks. And the second thing was that Stata as a software has a lot of online, sort of forums, etc., where people help. So that's where you figure out the truism today of about 50 or 60% of coding is just knowing how to Google. And if you know how to Google, then you know how to code. And that was true at that time. Like half the things that I think I just learned purely of basic sort of Google searches, trying to figure out if things work. And if I hadn't maybe been in that role, in that IRMA role, then I don't think I would have maybe stuck around with Stata. I would have probably, forgotten a few things, sort of wondered like, how do I solve certain problems, etc. So from there on, it was like just, being in touch with those research projects so that I knew Stata would be used for that.
This comes from necessity, right? Like
mainly. Yeah. So if I wanted to answer this research question, I have to use method X. And if I have to use method X, then I have to know how to code it. And if I code it wrong, then I'm not going to get an answer, not going to be able to write my paper. So yeah, just knowing that method and how it is implemented was pretty important at that point. It also helped that in Warwick, when they taught us econometrics, they again didn't just teach us sort of the theory part of it. We used to have like seminar sessions where we actually used to work through exercises.
Nice.
And sort of all of those things. So I had all those files as well. So I could sort of quickly go back and refer to things and just sort of learn on my own pace, so that I didn't have to, worry about other things. Yeah, I think that was a big part of my exposure to the current software that I use the most. Two other software, maybe if quickly shout out to maybe R. So because I started using R for my PhD, which was in 2020, when I finally, like, for somebody who'd been using Stata for 7 years, and then somebody says that, no, you can't do this in Stata, you have to do it in R. That was pretty annoying. But then I was like, okay. So I had colleagues at MP by then, like Hansika, for example, who had already been using R. So it helped that I could, maybe just quickly lean on her to get some understanding of where this code is going. And also my supervisor at Monash, he was using R. So it was fine. It's just I wasn't ideal because I didn't want to learn R, and I was pretty adamant that it wasn't going to help me. But I know R today, and it's not nearly as advanced as, and I'm not as comfortable with it as I am with Stata. But I think another sort of way in which this necessity thing comes up is really with doing something that is otherwise incredibly complicated in one software, which you can do very simply in another software. So recently I learned that about Python. So this is like the next level. Now R and now Python. And in Python, apparently, it's much easier to do some of these things. But again, I think I have too much of a status quo bias to really go over to R and Python at this stage in my career.
Fair enough. And I mean, I see a lot of different kinds of economists use like all kinds of different statistical tools, right? And so yeah, I think it makes sense that it just highly depends on the methodology and what the question demands itself. All right.
Yeah.
So, Warwick, why Warwick? Why go abroad? And why pick the majors and the subjects that you chose there?
So Warwick was an up-and-coming school at the time, in 2011. And when I say up-and-coming, I mean that it was giving like a serious sort of challenge to places like Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, and these things. And Oxford, Cambridge, LSE were also far, far more expensive and difficult to get into. So to be perfectly honest, getting into Warwick was not as and they were willing to accept sort of students with varied backgrounds like mine from Mumbai and things.
Yeah.
So that was one reason. And I guess the other thing was that kind of courses that they had on offer were very interesting to me. So in 2011, the head of department was this guy called Abhinay Muthu. And basically he had joined about like a while ago from another university, from Essex. And he had been making a lot of moves to hire top faculty to Warwick. Despite Warwick not being, like up there with Oxford and LSE and Cambridge and things like that. But he was able to attract top talent. One thing that especially attracted me was the fact that this business school was being sort of built up as a place where you could do both behavioral science and economics and psychology. At that time, I knew I wanted to do behavioral economics a little bit, but I knew enough that I didn't want to do specialization in, like, I didn't want to do a course, like an entire program in behavioral economics. I knew I just wanted to explore it as an elective, not close out any of my options. And I think that was a major reason. So I ended up taking the advanced econometrics course there because I had done statistics, and they said that if you've done statistics, then you should take the advanced course. So I did, and it worked out well for me, but it was easily one of the most difficult courses I've done in my life. And for my electives, I ended up taking experimental economics, contract economics, and game theory. And I think I took that choice because I think so at least with experimental economics and game theory, these are all micro sort of core things that, I was really interested in. Especially experimental was the closest subject to behavioral that they had on offer. So I just ended up taking that. And it was taught by this, like a luminary in the field, Graham Looms. And he was a phenomenal teacher because he was old school, and he had slides where he had like left out points because he was like, I'm not giving you this. So even when we downloaded the slides, we thought that it would be there, but it wasn't there. So we would have to remember what he told us in class about this. Otherwise you would just not be able to figure out what was happening. I think in game theory, it was a good course, but I think that it didn't build. It was the first year that it was being offered by that particular professor. His name was Francesco Squintani, and I think basically I think he didn't gauge the right level at which he should teach. So he ended up repeating a few things that were already done. So it wasn't like a very advanced game theory course, but it was still very, very interesting. And I still credit a lot of that for, being able to think through things logically, because game theory is just really about that. And the last course was on contract econ, which was like super interesting for me because that was being taught by this guy, Robert Akerlof, who is actually the son of George Akerlof, the Nobel laureate in economics. And that's not why I took the course. When I took the course also because he was like, I mean, his record seemed pretty amazing. Like he had studied at like Harvard, MIT, done some postdoc and things. And I was like, wow, like I really want to learn from this guy. And he was a good teacher too, so that I think that worked in my favor. I did my dissertation also with him. So yeah, I think and contract economics was also another incredibly challenging course because it deals with all these problems in micro which deal with like information asymmetry and things like that. I think that was mainly what drove my choice of choosing of going to Warwick for studying, and then within Warwick like maybe which electives to take as well.
But did you ever consider any kind of Indian universities?
I did, yeah. So I did apply to a few, and I think that they had entrance tests. So I don't remember now. Yeah, my test maybe for IGIDR, which was in Mumbai, was not so great, and I didn't attempt any of the universities, the Delhi University sort of entrance tests and things like that. And Mumbai University was not really an option for me, even though I knew many of my friends were going to go there. I think I was pretty set on going abroad at that time, and I think it was again pretty amazing that my family was able to support me through that, both financially, emotionally, other ways as well, because it clearly was not a cheap sort of thing to do.
Yes.
But I think my dad and my mom were both very clear that if you want to go ahead in economics and if you think that this will help you, then you should do it. And I think it's only now as a parent that I realize exactly what they must have gone through to have committed something like that to some kid who was just like 21. And so
yeah. Okay, so while we're actually on this topic, so you like in a podcast with a student of yours, which is Table Talk podcast, so I like
yes,
that a shout out as well, because I mean it did help give me an idea on like what kind of things you're interested in, what you talk about. So you said you wanted to show that it's not just the MITs and Harvards where quality research happens, but you can do it in India as well. And you also mentioned that social sciences training here is a little inadequate. What are some specific differences in the economics research that comes out of MP that makes it hold its ground against these ranked universities that you feel that a lot of other Indian universities lack?
Well, I think it's speaking the same language as what the level of research is at those universities, right? So even if you don't go all the way to the top like at MIT or Stanford or whatever else, like even generally if you take any US universities that has people in economics producing research, I think a big part of it is just speaking the same language, right? And I learned this only through my own sort of working with other academics or sort of reading other papers, etc. So just something as basic as today in economics, if you want to publish in a top journal or even something close to top journal, something that economists would actually read, it needs to have not just a good research question and sort of a nice methodology to answer that question. It needs to be sort of thorough, right? So it needs to have a finite answer to basically say that A causes B or that there is some link between A and B. And I have
give like an example.
So I'll talk about maybe my language paper that just came out in education economics. So basically it asks this question of, if you learn at a school that is different, that is giving you a medium of instruction that's different from your own native language, like say your mother tongue or the language that you speak at home, does that confer any advantage or disadvantage to you in terms of your learning outcomes? So that was a question, right, that my colleague Bijoytri sort of started with. And the way to answer that was that to look at this data set and try to sort of find out if we can first determine, whether we can find which are the cases in which there is this mismatch. So person who speaks Hindi at home but is studying in an English medium school, that's a mismatch. Person who speaks in Telugu at home but is studying in a Hindi medium school, that's also a mismatch. So the idea is that there are degrees of these mismatches which we can measure, but for our paper, in order for it to say be published in this education economics, like it would not just have to answer this question by showing, simple association between language variable and whatever the variable that we used was grade repetition, like basically whether they're repeating the same grade as they were in the previous year. But also show it in various settings, right? So to say that, okay, in households where English is the medium of instruction at school, then what happens to this relationship? What happens to this relationship in wealthier households, in households where the parents have studied a lot, households where parents have not studied a lot, households in West India, households in East India. So all of these are checks and balances that have now become so ubiquitous in economics that if you don't do them, then you are not speaking the language of economics, right? You're basically doing, for economists, you might as well be doing social science. And that they use that as a pejorative term, but I don't. And the idea is that if you don't do all of these checks and balances, then basically it's no longer an econ paper. And I think that now, at least today, I find myself in a position where I can say that I know this, but maybe I didn't know it for the longest time. And the idea is that papers at MP now, at least the fact that, since I lead research projects at MP, like we have a reasonable sort of understanding that we would have to meet this, at least this minimum requirement if we want to publish in an econ journal. And then we also know that if it doesn't meet those minimum requirements, then we know that it's not going to work at an econ journal, right? So then you can find other journals, you can find other homes, you can find other disciplines where this kind of evidence is still useful, but doesn't have to do all the sort of song and dance that economics requires you to do, right? So you can do less, but you would still have to speak their language, right? So you would still have to speak the language of, say, a sociologist or language of, say, somebody in gender studies or something else, right? But that's valuable. I think that's the difference between MP and, say, research that goes on in econ departments elsewhere, right? So an econ department elsewhere, an economist in that department will say, this has to be an econ paper. It has to get published in economics. But I think that is a very rigid and siloed way of thinking about research, because economics is but one of many different ways of looking at the world. So if I just rule out the fact that, okay, in this paper where I'm studying what is the impact of being exposed to LGBTQIA plus positively portraying sort of movies on how I think about people who belong to that community, and I say that I don't have like a way to do an RCT, I don't have enough data to do like heterogeneous groups analysis, whatever, so it's not an econ paper, so I'm not going to work on it. Bye. No, right? So I still try to make what I can of it, because I think that there's value in answering that question. Now, whether or not that qualifies as economics is not my concern. And I think that is incredibly freeing for me. And I can only do that at MP, right? So if I was part of some university and I tried to do the same thing, they would be like, go to the humanities and social science department and do this. Don't do this here.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think that also shapes what's happening with Indian universities, because they're trying, in a way, they're using the same playbook that foreign universities and other universities elsewhere
emulate the best that they can.
Yeah. And you can't blame them either, because they're working as part of some system, right? So the benefit that we have at MP is just that we're not part of that system. I mean, we are trying to throw signals to show that you can be part of the research output without doing it from like a linear line from A to B, right? So you can still go this whole way and still get to B, but you don't have to go through the same process. And I think that's more powerful for us, because it opens up so many new things for us, right? So we don't have to stick with the same old.
Okay. Thanks for that. How was your overall experience at Warwick?
It was pretty good. Yeah, I would say it was life-changing. So because I think it was my first time staying away from my family. No, that's not exactly true, but it was my first time staying abroad in a new country. And my twin brother and I, he was in London for his degree in journalism, and I was in Warwick for my degree in economics, and we used to like meet every now and then. We used to go watch concerts happening, sometimes to Birmingham, sometimes I would go to London. And, he had a very cramped space, because London was exactly like in Mumbai that way, that affordable housing was very, very difficult to find. I think overall, like, I think the one thing that I think back about it, obviously, is something that still nags me to this day, is that obviously I didn't get a job in the UK right after I graduated. And that was a lot of my money that my parents spent that I'm sure that they planned for completely, but they still, they had no way of recovering that. And I didn't really end up getting a job that paid me in pounds. And in September of 2012, like that was the top thing on my mind. Like I couldn't think of anything else. And I'd applied to so many jobs from May 2012 onwards till September, like till it was finally time to just quit and leave. And yeah, I think I still think a lot. I still think about that a lot as not being able to get a job. But again, now obviously looking back on it, you think of maybe that was not the worst thing that could have happened. And yeah, I think in a way it was good that I came back. Many of my friends came back around the same time from Warwick as well, so we were able to stay in touch and other things. So I think it was for the best in the end.
What do you think was the issue that you couldn't find a job? Was it like maybe that they did like companies weren't willing to sponsor, or I mean were you applying to like universities for research positions, or I mean what was the overall issue you think?
So I did have an offer to do my PhD right after my master's, but I didn't take it because I knew I wanted to work at least for a year so that I knew what it was like. Because if I hadn't worked and if I'd joined a PhD immediately after, like I think I would always think that, like, is this all there is to like sort of doing economics? And so I knew I wanted to work. So the PhD offer also was not funded. So that also helped me make my decision much easier, because if I was going to go back to my parents and ask them like, can you pay for 4 more years? They would probably not be very happy about that. So that, and at the time there was the beginnings of what was an increasingly inward-facing policy in the UK of not being welcome to sort of foreign students, etc. And they basically, that was the year in which 2012 was the year in which they abolished the post-study work visa, where basically students who studied in the UK could stay for up to, I think, 6 months or something like this, without having to apply sort of for a new visa again. So that time they removed that. Like it was just 90 days. You could stay about 90 days. And I know, unfortunately, a friend who did, in fact, stay for 90 days and still had to come back. So I was just like, it's not happening. Like the signals aren't looking that great. So why sort of spend more of my parents' money? And I would have to probably live in London or in somewhere else. So it was far more expensive. Yeah. And that just didn't make sense at the time.
Yeah. Again, just really fun that we're having this conversation in 2025 where those things are kind of happening all over again.
Yeah, I think of those times as the genesis of really what we're seeing today. I just didn't know it at the time.
Yeah. Okay. So, right. So I kind of got an idea for why. So one of the questions was like, why did you do 5 years of work and then do a PhD? I got the start of that answer, which is like, why did you start working? But why did you keep at it for like 5 years?
That's easy. I didn't get in anywhere. So, I think getting in was tough also because it requires you to align your expectations to a large extent of maybe what you think you're capable of doing and what others think that you are capable of doing. So I gave the GRE after I came back, and after I started working at IRMA, I remember vividly again, like taking a break from work and giving the GRE in Ahmedabad or Baroda or something like that, because that was the closest center. And it just wasn't a sort of a score that would be considered competitive at the levels at which I was aiming. And I wasn't aiming really, really high. Like I was aiming at, say, few schools like Georgetown, University of Georgia, maybe. So these weren't like the top schools in economics. So I had how people apply these days, or even back then, was just that they have a set of safety schools, they have a set of dream schools, and then they have stuff in the middle. So for me, I didn't get into any of them. So it was either that I didn't have a good understanding of where I stood relative to those places, or generally, I think that maybe I wanted to take my chances. And I think it was only in 2015 or 2016 that I received an offer from Michigan State University to do my PhD in agricultural and resource economics. So it was not like a straight PhD in economics. It was a specialization. And it was a very good department. It was a very good school. I was, again, privileged enough that my family was traveling to the US, and, I said that, why don't I just go and visit and meet these people, see what it's like before I, maybe think about making a decision. And the reason that I had to think about making a decision, considering I was somebody who hadn't received any other offers, and I got one offer, so I should have taken that offer. But at the same time, I was considering, I had successfully raised my first research grant, right? So as somebody who didn't have a PhD in economics, didn't, I don't know, like end up doing lots of research papers before, it was pretty amazing that somebody, so when I say somebody, I should say it was the Partnership for Economic Policy, PEP, who basically said that, so we submitted a proposal to them about doing some field experiment to study intra-household bargaining between real couples in Tamil Nadu. And yeah, 2015, I think, was when we submitted that proposal, and 2016 is when the project was supposed to start. So basically, it was between me choosing to do my own PhD or being sort of leading this project, which I had written pretty much. So HK, so Hansika, I, and one of our colleagues, Savita, like who's at Gokhale, we had written this proposal together, and I honestly didn't think that anything would happen, but it did. So I found myself in this very difficult position of either doing something that every conventional sort of wisdom would tell you, just do the PhD, like you can do grants later. At that point, to maybe do a project where you get to test out your own idea and do it in a very sort of rigorous way.
Difficult.
Yeah. So it was pretty challenging time, and I think my parents again were not very happy that I chose to lead the project and sort of do this project on intra-household bargaining.
But what was the final factor that made you take that decision instead of Michigan State?
I think the fact that I wouldn't get to do the grant project again, because then the grant would come through, but I wouldn't get to do it. Like the idea would get implemented, but probably in some way that I would have no control.
And you didn't like
over.
Like
no, because so I wouldn't think too much about it if it wasn't my idea. Because it was my idea, I think I had some sense of ownership over it, and I said that maybe I'm onto something here, and maybe we should look at it. And I don't think that that anybody would ever give me a grant again, to be totally honest. So it's a different matter that I maybe thought that whether I would get a PhD offer again after that. Maybe I thought I would. So I just thought, yeah, why not do this instead? So I think that I ended up going the grant route, and then honestly, that got me further down the sort of rabbit hole of working instead of getting into a PhD. And the fact that I was working at MP, I think, was even contributing to that, because I had the freedom, I had the liberty to sort of work on my own research projects and things. So yeah, I think that was how maybe I continued down this path of working even like 5 years after my master's.
So how did you end up then getting in at like IITB-Monash?
So I was applying for programs in India as well as abroad. So in India, most of the PhD programs, again, the same as masters, they require you to do this entrance test and sort of do all of that. And many of them were based in Delhi, other than, of course, the IGIDR one. And I think, again, I was not very keen to sort of relocate at that point in time. So then I think I ended up sort of looking at this program, which was not quite just the IIT Bombay PhD, which I was not very convinced about. At least from my own point of view of being professionally competent as an economist, like I don't know if it would help me get there. So then they had this joint program, which I thought was pretty interesting, because it kind of, I guess, in a way satisfied this two criteria of, both having some exposure outside of, India, as well as, then being there in India for majority part of writing and doing research and things like that. Because my research for my PhD was already going to be based in India, because I was going to study cash, because the way that the IITB-Monash PhD works is that you apply to a project, and this project already has some boundaries sort of decided, because it's funded by some donor or something else, some sponsor. So they decide what they're interested in studying, and then they try to find a PhD student who can basically help them answer this question.
Got it.
So it helped that it was fairly sort of definite, like what the research would entail. And I think that I was in a good position to answer many of those things. And I think somehow it just, again, like it just worked out, like, because the interview experiences that I'd had with PhD programs just in India, those are not very good. Like the tests itself, whatever, entrance test, all of that was fine. Those were sort of pretty okay. But I think the interview process itself left me disillusioned and sort of, made me think about if doing a PhD means that I have to go through this, where basically in the interview I get asked very technical questions about corners of economics textbooks that I don't remember and that I don't really care to read. Then, is that really something that should be something that I should be working towards?
Right.
And I think the fact that the IITB-Monash entrance, also the sort of procedure through which they select PhD students, was very different from that. That also gave me some idea that, okay, maybe this fits, maybe we both sort of, are looking for the same thing here, that they're not looking for somebody who overtly has like a very strong sort of technical theoretical understanding of economics. because by that time I'd already done 5 years of research. So they were not going to teach me how to do research.
Yeah.
They were just going to basically hire me to do research for them. And that's kind of what I was looking for as well. I wasn't looking for a guide or supervisor who would basically look over my shoulder and say that, no, don't look at this paper, look at this paper kind of thing. I was just looking for a collaborator, a companion who would maybe say that, okay, maybe this is not the right direction, maybe take another direction. That's about it. The fact that we understood each other, I think a big part of that played a role in choosing IITB-Monash as well. And I think the last thing that I'll say on that, which is probably a cautionary tale for everybody who's choosing to do a master's in economics or a master's from the UK generally, is that the master's degree is not recognized officially in India if you want to do a PhD in India. So it's a 1-year master's, and to this date, as far as I know, they have not established what we call equivalence. So in India, they have this really nice rule, which means that if you want to classify something as a master's degree, it needs to be 2 years. So not 2 years, not a master's. That's basically the simple rule that they apply to all master's programs around the world. Whether you go to a Oxford or a Cambridge or an LSE or whatever, it doesn't matter. Yeah. If it's a 1-year program, it's a 1-year program. It's not a master's. So the experience that I had was that one way to get into a PhD in India was to do NET. So I gave the NET. I failed twice. And the third time it clicked. And I got this, what they call as a junior research fellowship. And then I sent them my documents and I said, this is my master's, here it is. And there was silence for a long time. And then after that, they got back to me and they said, I got a letter which said that you're not eligible to receive.
Whoa.
So I was like, okay, but you could have told me when I applied the first time. I didn't have to get it 3 times and clear it the third time for me to know that. But I guess it's more of this buyer beware kind of behavior, right? So, which is that if millions of people give this exam, then surely the universities or whatever, it was run by the UGC at that time. So they were not obviously going to be checking everybody's sort of, eligibility. They just assumed that if you advertise eligibility conditions, people will know that if they're not eligible, they will not give this test. But clearly I wasn't one of those. So that's how things panned out in the end.
Okay. And how was your experience with what you did at IITB-Monash? Sorry, I have so many questions. I'm looking for what you did there.
I think it was good in the sense that, like I said, when I started out in 2017, there was 1 year of course for IIT Bombay, and then there was following period, which I would have to present like at least one seminar paper, which basically means just some literature review usually, so that you can show that you've made some progress on your idea. And most people, as part of this IITB-Monash program, go to Monash only when it's time to write, like basically towards the end of their sort of PhD journey. But I chose to go in my second year, and I credit a lot of, what I took out from the program because of the fact that I went to Monash early, because for 2 reasons. So one is because when I went there, both my advisors were there and they were sort of active and they were helping me. But I also met other who are now collaborators, like Pushkar Maitro, for example, who was one of my co-authors. And we worked together on like a research paper when I was there, even though I wasn't there to work on my research paper. I was there to work on my PhD, but I was working with him as well. And I could take courses. I sort of, really sort of enjoyed my time at Melbourne, even though it meant 1 more year again of not being here at home in India. And the other reason that I credit that going there early is because right after that COVID happened. So, many of my batchmates in the IITB-Monash program were unfortunately never able to go to Melbourne for the duration of their PhD. And that sucks because a big part of that program was exposure to, Monash, and you get a stipend, you get to stay there, you get to sort of be part of that research environment and things. And the fact that they couldn't do that, I think it's very super unfortunate. So I count myself lucky that I structured, my sort of work in that way. Then when I came back, I had 1 year before COVID struck to basically collect data. So again, because I had gone to Monash early, I was able to work on sort of working out a plan to collect data. And I did collect the data right after I came back. And after that, COVID struck. So basically, again, if I hadn't done it at that time, it probably never would have happened, or I would have had to pivot to something else, as again, many people in their PhDs had to do at that time. And the main thing that only got delayed was that finally I was actually ready to submit, or that I had submitted my thesis in May of 21. But finally, I defended my thesis only in Feb of 22. So this sort of is apparently a much longer gap than what it usually is. So in principle, I could have graduated in 21, but I graduated in 22. But that's okay. There were a lot of other things going on in life at that time. So yeah, I think that was part of my experience at IITB-Monash.
Okay, cool. Right. Yes. Now to your work, basically like all the kind of work that you did in those 5 years. What would you say was your first job and how did it go? And what new skills did you have to learn for it? I know you said IRMA, so like
yes. So before that, I was working at this World Resources Institute for about a year as right after I came back from Warwick. So I came back from Warwick in September of 2012, and I got the job at World Resources Institute, which was initially an internship, research intern type thing, in November 2012. So it was short, but at that time it was like I'll take pretty much anything. So luckily that was a good sort of way to approach it, because WRI was a fantastic institution to work with, and basically, so they're a think tank who works on lots of issues at urban transport, environment, climate change, all of these things. Now, of course, they're much bigger than they were at the time, but even then they were a US based. They were already sort of big in India as well, and I was extremely fortunate to be working with people there who were really passionate. I think that was the first thing that really struck me about WRI. They were so passionate about the kinds of projects that they were doing. Yes, they were a non-profit, so obviously, it's not that they were doing something with the sole purpose of, like maybe making a business out of it. But at the same time, that these people are so passionate about also knowledge and about evidence and things like that, which I found, which I thought that others didn't have. Like outside of academia, I thought nobody really cared about the fact that there's a paper or something. So it was a great place to work, and I was working with this guy Akshay Mani, who was basically part of their urban transport division. I was working on sort of understanding auto rickshaw sort of sector dynamics within Mumbai and other cities, because we were seeing auto rickshaws as basically being like this middle between public transport, which is like trains and buses and things like that, and private transport, which people were using a lot. So maybe thinking about shifting some people from private to this intermediate sort of mode of transport. So yeah, it was pretty awesome.
Okay. But like, what new skills did you learn for it?
What's that? Sorry?
What new skills did you learn during that?
So I think I learned to apply some of the things in a much better way. Like I think writing wise, I was writing like for an academic audience before. And I think for the first time with WRI, I think I started writing for people who maybe didn't read papers for a living and things like that. So that was a big skill to learn at that stage. And also maybe networking a little bit, because I don't think that I really thought that I would ever have to network with others and things like that. But I think it was
but isn't that really important in research in general?
It is. But academics are a very strange breed, right? So they know they have to talk to each other, but they still won't. So, there's that ego thing sort of going on there. But I think in more professional settings, and sort of even in the social sector, for example, like you can't let your ego come in the way. Like you just have to swallow your pride and sort of talk to them if they have something that you can get. So yeah.
Okay. What was your work as a resident economist at Internet Society, and also what did you do as deputy director at BIAS?
So at BIAS, I was leading so because I did that technically before ISOC, I was like sort of advising on the behavioral economics and sort of behavioral science aspects of some of their projects related to, say, human development, sort of sustainable consumption. They're doing a few other projects, so I was helping them design like some of their experiments, their questionnaires, etc., and sort of just making sure overall that there was some underlying sort of way to measure some of the things that they were trying to measure. It was a pretty short stint, because I think it was at the time of COVID, so it was pretty sort of tough time to be working remotely. They're a debt-based organization. I was working in Mumbai. But I think it was a good sort of experience for and I still consult with them from time to time on some projects. At Internet Society, actually, it's pretty rare that it worked out, like, because it was one of those jobs that I just ended up applying to because I was looking for consulting work, to pay the bills. And basically ended up applying here, and I didn't know anything about internet economics or like how digitization sort of works in economics and things like that. But the work at Internet Society is so sort of interesting, because they have like network engineers, they have computer scientists, they have storytelling sort of experts, etc. So such a diverse group of people who, again, all share the same passion for basically making sure everybody has access to the internet. And this reminded me a lot of what I'd done first with World Resources Institute, because they were all passionate people and they all had value for evidence. So, and the fact that they had a value for, in this case, at a much higher level now, for an economist who could basically maybe interpret some of the problems that they were looking at. So one problem that they were looking at was, is there a way for them to talk about the impact of these internet shutdowns, right? So in India, for example,
I remember that article. I actually read it. It's really good.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. So India does a lot of internet shutdowns, right? Around various parts of parts of the year. Every other sort of exam season, for example, they shut down internet. And they were just trying to understand, like, surely this has some economic impact, right? So surely it means that some people aren't able to talk to each other. And if some people aren't able to talk to each other, then it means that their businesses could lose out, customers could not find what they want to find, and so on and so forth. So we were just trying to figure out, is there a way to quantify that? Is there a way to maybe come up with a measure that maybe helps us pinpoint that? And I'm incredibly sort of, I think, again, honored that they allowed me to be part of their work, because they do such important work. And there's this tool called the net loss calculator, which has come out from the work that we did. Obviously, I got a paper out of it, so I was extremely happy, but they also got a tool out of it.
Awesome. Right. And also, I wanted to ask about your experience with fieldwork. So, like, during the rural socioeconomic profile of India. Yeah.
Yes. So that was my first experience of fieldwork, where basically I was assisting Hari K. Nagarajan in basically implementing the next version of this incredibly rich and detailed survey of farmers in India, which was earlier called the Rural and Economic Demographic Survey of India, REDS, which many researchers still use for their papers. And Social and Economic Profile of Rural India was the project that he started as a continuation of REDS at IRMA. And I remember visiting a few villages in Tamil Nadu and in and around Lucknow. And it was just pretty transformative, because it was the first time that I'd found myself, applying, or as an economist who maybe thinks about research as, maybe like at the averages, right? So as somebody who's a quantitative researcher, we don't really give much weightage to like, what is the narrative, like what's the underlying sort of story that's going on here. So being in the field really helps with that, because it helps connect maybe the things that you find in your data, the things that you find in your papers to, what's actually going on around. But at the same time, that risk is very high, right? So if you ask any qualitative researcher like what they found, then they'll probably sort of relay a whole bunch of sort of anecdotes and case studies to you, and then try to capture some broad trends from that. But as a quantitative researcher, if you go to the field, then suddenly you find yourself trying to look for patterns that you found in your observation in a much larger data set, which could be easily very confusing for you, right? So if you saw somebody sort of selling their cow for X amount of rupees, and you go back to the data and you try to see, well, how much are people selling their cows for, you would not find any correspondence between the two things, because that's a single data point. So I think fieldwork, again, I was really lucky to be able to do that fieldwork for CEPRI, because what we were doing at that time was to just fine-tune the questionnaire, just to make sure that the questions that we're asking are things that people can understand, and also gather some of this qualitative sort of evidence for eventually what is a book that I guess has been in the works for a very long time. And after that, I did this field experiment in Tamil Nadu where we got the funding from PEP. And that I have a lot to say about, but it was pretty amazing because it was our own project and I was in charge, HK was there, and my colleague Savita was there, and we were basically in charge of everything. Like, it just came down to us at the end of the day, like whether the field visit was organized properly, whether if an experiment is taking place, then are the people who are supposed to participate in the experiment, are they coming? If they're not coming, we have to do something, right? Nobody else is going to like magically sort of come and do something about it. So it was, I still I think it was October of 2016 when we did the fieldwork, and it was all very, very, sort of a very steep learning curve, like super, super steep. So I'm really happy that paper finally got published. Otherwise I would have very little to show for it. So
you had to make a lot of decisions on ground, like
yes. Yes. Yeah. Especially when you're leading the project. Like, I think when you're not leading the project, the stakes are pretty low. So you can manage. You can sort of be a fly on the wall and sort of listen in to conversations and sort of understand what's going on. and why certain questions should be asked a certain way, etc. These are all interesting things from a research point of view. But I think when you're leading, you don't have those luxuries. You just have to focus on, am I getting the data, and is it happening in the right way? So yeah.
Okay. All right. Next is editor at South Asia Research. So what do you do there?
So South Asia Research is actually a pretty different journal from most journals in that they still follow a pretty old school system, because the editor-in-chief, his name is Werner Mensky, and basically he still accepts submissions by email. So most journals, and I say that with some humor, I guess, because most journals today will have their own submission system where you have to format like tables and figures and then put it into the system. Then some editor will sort of assign them to reviewers and do the peer review, and then they'll get back to you with comments, all of these things. But at SAR, it's very, very different, because at SAR, we do a screening process where we sort of look at the first pass, like, will this paper be sort of relevant? And when I say we have a team, like I have other people who are working in other areas. I work in economics, and we just screen papers to see, will this be suitable for the readership of SAR? So if it passes that first sort of check, then we sort of proceed with a peer review.
It's like a face value check.
Yes. Yeah. So like as experts in economics or whatever, media or literature, somebody will read it and they'll make a judgment call on whether this is appropriate or not. And then it will go through the peer review process. And even there, so at least up until very recently, like even the peer review itself used to happen directly with the authors. So we used to email them and sort of give them comments to come back and track changes. So, very old school kind of system. And now we are, obviously trying to streamline that a little bit. But my experience with that has been, again, supremely useful, because, here I am sort of dealing with papers in economics that are not nearly at the level of, say, what the top sort of economics journals are, but still is in a way useful, right? So it still adds to the literature. These are topics that maybe others don't talk about. Like top economists may not talk about these topics because they say that I can't do any causal links. Like I can't show that A causes B. I can't show that it has some broader economic impact, etc. But I still think that the evidence is useful, because in trying to show some broad trends or trying to capture some, sort of broad, associations between things, right? So there is a place for that. And I think at South Asia Research, at SAR, we've been able to, try to find some balance, right, between like the more sort of heavy technical, like econometrics-driven economics and sort of more descriptive sort of economics, which still has, I think, some value. And I think the number of papers that I've reviewed, I can't really count, but it's like I'm, again, incredibly fortunate, because the way that I got that was during my PhD. We were doing a communication skills course with this guy, Professor Parthasarthi, who's still at IITB. And he said that, okay, here is this journal, guys. The journal's called South Asia Research. They're looking for book reviews. Would any of you like to review a book? So I was like, yes, I don't mind, because we were learning in the communication skills class about how to review books.
Okay.
So the book as an assignment, and then I just sent this assignment over to South Asia Research, and this guy Werner, he liked it so much that he said that, why don't you sort of start reviewing papers for us? And
you got really lucky there.
Why don't you be part of our editorial board and things like that? Because he also has a culture of sort of encouraging young talent to be part of South Asia Research. So our editorial board is like not a bunch of old white people. Like they're all like men and women and others from South Asia itself, who are based in various South Asia institutions, likely all under 40. So it's really like really young folks. So yeah, at least from an academic point of view, it's really young.
Yeah. Okay. So now you are also visiting faculty at NMIMS and I think another college as well, Meghnad Desai, right?
Meghnad Desai, yes.
Yeah. So what are your favorite and least favorite parts of being a teacher? And what I think you've already answered this part of the question, is like, how do you maneuver a student who is completely disinterested in what you have to say, or the subject itself? Is like you try to make it as interesting as possible and as relevant as possible, right? But what about the first part of the question?
I mean, I guess I don't have a most favorite part of teaching.
Okay.
I don't have one. I would like to say it's the money, but I can't, because it's not the money either. I guess it's about maybe having some peek into how people think, because at the heart of it, I'm still a researcher. So even when I teach, I think I'm thinking about what kind of things can I say to elicit things from others. So in a way, and I hope none of my students are sort of taking this the wrong way, but in a way, it's like a large-scale experiment for me.
No, it makes sense. Yeah.
So if I say something, then what do I get in response, right? So I think that's maybe that's an interesting thing about teaching for me. I wouldn't say it's a favorite thing either. I guess the least favorite thing is grading exams and sort of grading assignments and things like that. I don't particularly enjoy it. I don't find it to be maybe a very useful exercise so far, at least in my life, but it's something that we all have to do. Maybe it stems from the fact that I'm not also paid additional to do that part. Like that part is like all inclusive kind of thing. So maybe if they did pay me something extra on top of what I get for just teaching, maybe I would also, be okay with doing the grading and the exam setting and all of these things. I guess another less favorite thing, maybe not least favorite thing, is maybe about just the fact that there's some asymmetry in, how I see students versus how they see themselves, right? So maybe I see most students, because I teach either undergrads or above, so I don't teach anybody in JC or school or anything. Yeah. So I treat most people like adults. And I think that most people don't like to be seen as adults in these situations.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And then it's a bit unfortunate. Maybe it's not solely down to the students themselves. I think it's a big function of the university system and all of that. And maybe our schooling system is to fault in some way as well. But yeah, I don't really like the fact that maybe that I'm looking to treat everyone as adults, but not everybody wants to be treated like an adult. Or not everybody maybe sees being treated as an adult as a good thing to do in universities. So yeah, I don't really know. Like, I think that's something that needs work, and but I still do it. Like I don't have an alternative. Like I can't switch over to treating students like children, treating students like.
I don't think you'd enjoy it if you did that, and if you don't enjoy it, it's gonna affect your teaching as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that, and I think my main role is just as somebody who's maybe how do you say, like maybe just a bridge, right? So that's really
facilitator.
That's all I really see myself as. I think if I can even get like one or two people interested in doing economics, because that's what my teachers did for me, I think my job is done. I don't really have high ambitions as a teacher either. Like I don't have these ambitions that maybe one of them will grow up to, like, become like a Nobel laureate in economics and things, which is what teachers in many economics institutions will have, right? So they'll be like, I want to train people so that they become the best in their field. And I was like, no, none of that stuff for me. That's okay. But I don't hate teaching. I can't say that I love it or anything, but yeah, I borrow some of her tricks to keep myself engaged. Yeah, so for me, it's more of, how much can I keep myself engaged rather than the other way.
Okay, yeah. Right. So you said you like to play around with the standard methodology of research based on your answer to previous interviews. Can you give an example of a creative way you've gone about answering a research question?
Well, I guess we're still in the process of answering it, but we're really thinking about, for example, now there's this paper that I'm working on with AV and with Anju and with AJ, and we're sort of working on what is there any economic impact of eclipses? So when we talk about economic impact, the channel that we're thinking about is basically through superstitions. Right. So because in India or maybe in other cultures where eclipses are considered to have some element of cultural significance or even religious significance in some way, people might say that it's a bad omen to sort of do work on those days or to undertake some new activity or something like this on these days. So our challenge was to really find two things. One is which day was what place exposed to an eclipse, because the eclipse is not seen by everyone, but it still happens. And people might still observe the same practices that they have when they just know that an eclipse is taking place, even if they can't see it.
Yeah, just on the calendar.
Exactly. It's just on the calendar. So you're like, no work on this day, right? Yeah. So I think that one way in which we've tried to do that is to basically take this data, which has data on all eclipses in the last century or something like this, and basically map it against, we're trying to now map it against higher frequency data, because daily data is useful. So the first thing that we're thinking about is things like stock markets, etc., where economic activity might vary more on a daily basis, but also on firm level decisions, which comes from a survey. So in this survey, we don't get the same firm that's surveyed every day. Instead, we have different firms that are surveyed on different days. But in principle, we could find a firm that looks like, so firm A and firm B, but interviewed on two separate days. One day that has seen the eclipse, one day that they have not seen the eclipse. So if other things are sort of roughly the same for these two firms, then we should think that maybe eclipses have something to do with, how they take decisions and things like that. So we're still at a stage where we're kind of trying to figure out how do we, get these two data sets together.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's something, and I can honestly say that I came up with it. So I feel like it's something that I'm not, taking over somebody else's idea or anything else. Alien Age, yeah, they're sort of helping me work through it. But I think, the idea itself, I think I came up with. So
yeah. So So what kind of lifestyle would you say being a researcher and also maybe a part-time professor affords you in terms of, you can like be as general as you want, but I mean in terms of money, time investment, type of work, etc. And like what kind of person would you not recommend this lifestyle to?
Well, I think I'm speaking from a position of privilege myself when, I say that I have, family here, and I have family to sort of thank when I think about where I am right now. And also that they would help me, financially, emotionally, again, in any way, if I needed it. And not everybody has that. And I think that that's a big barrier to about who can sustain themselves doing research in the way that I'm doing research. And when I say about in the way that I'm doing research, I really mean as MP, like me, somebody who's working with MP. So we don't really rely, when I say we, I also mean me, but I don't really rely on MP for financial sort of security. I sort of work on consulting and other things to basically give me that. And whatever I do at MP is like driven from my own research. So I think that for somebody who's looking to do research in economics, being part of a traditional university system or a think tank or whatever else, I think is a pretty useful way to, approach research. It has its own shortcomings. It has all the sort of, problems and all the other things that is the reason why I work with MP, but it still gives you the financial security, right? So it still gives you that financial security to, earn, I think, today, earn a decent sort of income, be well sort of well positioned to say, eventually say, if you wanted to buy a house, if you wanted to buy a car, it would basically be possible for you to do all of those things. But I think starting out as a researcher, like say as an RA or something like this, those things might seem like they're very far off. So I never imagined that getting a PhD would help me step up. Like I just thought that I would end up, getting the same pay as I would if I didn't have a PhD, but it did help me. So one, I think, is that if you want to get into research, at least academic research, then a PhD is almost like a given. Because today, even though research is no longer just academic research, doing academic research is more of a PhD's domain than it would be, say, somebody who didn't have that. And the market recognizes this, a market for basically academic work. And if you were working in think tanks or like other things, I would say that from a lifestyle perspective, like they pay much better. And consulting and all of those things are very much on the cards. You don't need a PhD to do that. If you did do a PhD, then you might feel like maybe the returns to your PhD are actually higher, but they're actually not, because you may not be doing academic research. You may be using some of the skills you learned in your PhD, but not in the way that you think. So I think those are kind of the trade-offs. And I find myself now, at least today, like if you ask me the same question maybe about 10 years ago, I would be like, no way. Like I'm not getting here where I am today in terms of my own like finances, in terms of my own sort of financial independence and security. But the fact that I'm here today, I think, has a lot to do with with the fact that I was able to do a PhD, and maybe the fact that I was able to take some chances because of my family and because of my partner sort of working as well, right? So yeah.
Sure. Okay. So any plans or ambitions for the next couple of years that you're excited about?
Well, I hope to publish in maybe a good top economics journal, despite all the conversation that we've had about how it's overrated. But I think that in order to signal in a big way to everybody, I don't know who everybody is in this case, but really to the economics profession, that maybe you don't need the sort of strength and might of big US, sort of traditional academic institutions to do that. So I hope that happens. I'm not holding my breath for it, but I will keep working towards it. And I think the second thing is that sort of working on an idea that's fairly interdisciplinary, but being able to maybe show to economists that it has some value. So yeah, I think those are two things that I definitely want to maybe achieve in the next 5 to 10 years. And I guess I say 5 to 10 years, knowing how long it takes to publish work in economics. I think professionally, those are my ambitions. And I guess personally speaking is just, maybe, finding more innovative ways to, I guess apply the things that I know, and hopefully cut back on teaching a little bit. So.
Oh yeah, fair enough. Okay. Now we have a like final kind of rapid fire thing.
Cool.
So these are questions that you've not seen before.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. And they're like, you can answer them in like 2 sentences.
Okay.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah.
The first one is actually from AV. By the way, to people who are listening, AV is Abhishek Vajala from Monk Prayogshala. So he's in the economics department, also does schoolwork.
Yes.
His question is, do you like cats more or dogs more?
Cats, yeah.
Cats? Okay.
Yeah.
This is a question I asked HK as well. Is dinner and a conversation with anybody in the world, dead or alive? I'm going to limit it to one person now. So who would you call?
Daniel Kahneman, I think. Yeah, I met him once, and
okay.
I honestly, I don't know how much I owe to him, and the way that I think today. So yeah, him.
Did HK also meet him? Sorry,
No.
That's so sad.
Yeah. Yes, it is quite unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Best advice you've given or gotten so far?
Best advice I've gotten is from my professor, experimental economics professor, Graham Looms. He said that the best thing that you can do for an idea that you've thought about for a long time is to let it go. And the longer you spend working on an idea, the longer it'll take you to realize that it's not going to work out. So you should be able to let those ideas go. And that profoundly sort of stuck with me. It still sticks with me today because it shapes a lot of, how much effort I put into thinking about new things.
Very interesting. I like as a writer, which is what I do. I think that's also like I'm kind of processing that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Some areas in the Indian context of the vast domain of development and experimental economics that you think are under-researched and worth exploring?
I think that there hasn't been that much work on domestic violence. When I said work on that, I mean work related to combating domestic violence. I think there are a few interesting experimental studies and things like RCTs and stuff, but I don't think nothing comes to the top of my mind because I've done some work in that area and I was just reviewing another paper on it. So I find that that's a pretty important area maybe that hasn't been sort of worked on as much.
Okay. Actually, one out of personal curiosity, top album off the top of your head. Yeah.
Off the top of my head, so I listened to Under Oath had this album which was called Voyeurist, I think. So yeah, Under Oath. I'm a big Under Oath fan, so yeah.
Okay, noted. 2 economists, ideally with an active social media in the Indian context, worth listening to for both the aspiring researcher and the informed citizen.
So I think this guy Arvind Subramaniam is pretty good because he comments a lot on contemporary issues. And since he's no longer sort of strictly associated with the government, he also reasonable level of sort of independence, etc., all of those things. Other than him, I think that I want to say either Arjun Jaydev or Arun Jaydev. I'm so sorry, I don't exactly remember his name. He's at Azim Premji, I think, and he is a heterodox economist, and he also does some super fascinating work. I just want a quick shout out for Niranjan Rajadhyaksh, who is he's just all around awesome. So yeah.
Okay. And I think that pretty much leads us to the last question, which is not actually a question, last bit, which is I give you a movie recommendation. So,
oh, cool. Yes.
Have you watched Coherence? It's sci-fi.
What's it called?
Coherence.
Coherence. No, I haven't seen that one.
Well, then you should watch that.
Okay. Cool.
Glad you enjoyed it. And
yeah, no. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Cool. Yes, I think